Preface. Life is short. This is a book of recipes, solutions to common problems, copy and paste code snippets, explanations, examples, and short tutorials. This book is meant to save you time. Time, as they say, is money, but a span of time is also a piece of your life. Our lives are better spent creating new things than fighting our own errors, or trying to solve problems that have already been solved. We present this book in the hope that the time it saves, distributed across all its readers, will greatly outweigh the time we spent creating it. The Ruby programming language is itself a wonderful time-saving tool. It makes you more productive than other programming languages because you spend more time making the computer do what you want, and less wrestling with the language. But there are many ways for a Ruby programmer to spend time without accomplishing anything, and we've encountered them all. Time spent writing Ruby implementations of common algorithms. Time spent debugging Ruby implementations of common algorithms. Time spent discovering and working around Ruby-specific pitfalls. Time spent on repetitive tasks, including repetitive programming tasks, that could be automated. Time spent duplicating work that someone else has already made publicly available. Time spent searching for a library that does X. Time spent evaluating and deciding between the many libraries that do X. Time spent learning how to use a library because of poor or outdated documentation. 17. Time lost staying away from a useful technology because it seems intimidating. We, and the many contributors to this book, recall vividly our own wasted hours and days. We've distilled our experiences into this book so that you don't waste your time, or at least so you waste it enjoyably on more interesting problems. Our other goal is to expand your interests. If you come to this book wanting to generate algorithmic music with Ruby, then, yes, Recipe 13.14 will save you time over starting from scratch. It's more likely that you'd never considered the possibility until now. Every recipe in this book was developed and written with these two goals in mind: to save you time, and to keep your brain active with new ideas. Audience: this cookbook is aimed at people who know at least a little bit of Ruby, or who know a fair amount about programming in general. This isn't a Ruby tutorial. See other resources on page XXV below for some real tutorials, but if you're already familiar with a few other programming languages, you should be able to pick up Ruby by reading through the first 10 chapters of this book and typing in the code listings as you go. We've included recipes suitable for all skill levels, from those who are just starting out with Ruby, to experts who need an occasional reference. We focus mainly on generic programming techniques, but we also cover specific application frameworks, like Ruby on Rails and GUI libraries, and best practices, like unit testing. Even if you just plan to use this book as a reference, we recommend that you skim through it once to get a picture of the problems we solve. This is a big book, but it doesn't solve every problem. If you pick it up and you can't find a solution to your problem, or one that nudges you in the right direction, then you've lost time. If you skim through this book once beforehand, you'll get a fair idea of the problems we cover in this book, and you'll get a better hit rate. You'll know when this book can help you, and when you should consult other books, do a web search, ask a friend, or get help some other way. The structure of this book: each of this book's chapters focuses on a kind of programming or a particular data type. This overview of the chapters should give you a picture of how we divided up the recipes. Each chapter also has its own, somewhat lengthier introduction, which gives a more detailed view of its recipes. At the very least, we recommend you skim the chapter introductions and the table of contents. 18. Preface. A brand new chapter covers what has changed since Ruby 1.8 when the first version of this book was released. Chapter 1, Ruby 2.1, covers what is new in Ruby 2.1. The next 6 chapters cover Ruby's built-in data structures. Chapter 2, Strings, contains recipes for building, processing, and manipulating strings of text. We devote a few recipes specifically to regular expressions, Recipe 2.16 through Recipe 2.18, but our focus is on Ruby-specific issues, and regular expressions are a very general tool. If you haven't encountered them yet, or just find them intimidating, we recommend you go through an online tutorial or Mastering Regular Expressions by Jeffrey Friedel, O'Reilly. Chapter 3, Numbers, covers the representation of different types of numbers, real numbers, complex numbers, arbitrary precision decimals, and so on. It also includes Ruby implementations of common mathematical and statistical algorithms, and explains some Ruby quirks you'll run into if you create your own numeric types, Recipe 3.13 and Recipe 3.14. Chapter 4, Date and Time, covers Ruby's two interfaces for dealing with time, the one based on the C-time library, which may be familiar to you from other programming languages, and the one implemented in pure Ruby, which is more idiomatic. Chapter 5, Arrays, introduces the array, Ruby's simplest compound data type. Many of an array's methods are actually methods of the enumerable mixin. This means you can apply many of these recipes to hashes and other data types. Some features of enumerable are covered in this chapter, Recipe 5.4 and Recipe 5.6, and some are covered in Chapter 8. Chapter 6, Hashes, covers the hash, Ruby's other basic compound data type. Hashes make it easy to associate objects with names and find them later. Hashes are sometimes called lookup tables or dictionaries, two telling names. It's easy to use hashes along with arrays to build deep and complex data structures. Chapter 7, Files and Directories, covers techniques for reading, writing, and manipulating files. Ruby's file access interface is based on the standard C file libraries, so it may look familiar to you. This chapter also covers Ruby's standard libraries for searching and manipulating the file system. Many of these recipes show up again in Chapter 25. The first 6 chapters deal with specific algorithmic problems. The next 4 are more abstract, they're about Ruby idiom and philosophy. If you can't get the Ruby language itself to do what you want, or you're having trouble writing Ruby code that looks the way Ruby should look, the recipes in these chapters may help. Preface 19. Chapter 8, Code Blocks and Iteration, contains recipes that explore the possibilities of Ruby's code blocks, also known as closures. Chapter 9, Objects and Classes, covers Ruby's take on object-oriented programming. It contains recipes for writing different types of classes and methods, and a few recipes that demonstrate capabilities of all Ruby objects, such as freezing and cloning. Chapter 10, Modules and Namespaces, covers Ruby's modules. These constructs are used to mix new behavior into existing classes and to segregate functional ITY into different namespaces. Chapter 11, Reflection and Metaprogramming, covers techniques for programmatically exploring and modifying Ruby class definitions. Chapter 7 covers basic file access, but doesn't touch much on specific file formats. We devote 3 chapters to popular ways of storing data. Chapter 12, XML and HTML, shows how to handle the most popular data interchange formats. The chapter deals mostly with parsing other people's XML documents and web pages, but see Recipe 12.8. Chapter 13, Graphics and Other File Formats, covers data interchange formats other than XML and HTML, with a special focus on generating and manipulating graphics. Chapter 14, Databases and Persistence, covers the best Ruby interfaces to data storage formats, whether you're serializing Ruby objects to disk, or storing structured data in a database. This chapter demonstrates everything from different ways of serializing data and indexing text, to the Ruby client libraries for popular SQL databases, to full-blown abstraction layers like Active Record that save you from having to write SQL at all. Currently the most popular use of Ruby is in network applications, mostly through Ruby on Rails. We devote 3 chapters to different types of applications. Chapter 15, Internet Services, kicks off our networking coverage by illustrating a wide variety of clients and servers written with Ruby libraries. Chapter 16, Web Development, Ruby on Rails, covers the web application framework that's been driving so much of Ruby's recent popularity. Chapter 17, Web Development, Sinatra, covers a popular micro-web framework. Chapter 18, Web Services and Distributed Programming, covers two techniques for sharing information between computers during a Ruby program. In order to use a web service, you make an HTTP request of a program on some other computer, usually one you don't control. Ruby's DRB library lets you share Ruby data XX Preface. Structures between programs running on a set of computers, all of which you control. We then have 3 chapters on the auxiliary tasks that surround the main programming work of a project. Chapter 19, Testing, Debugging, Optimizing, and Documenting, focuses mainly on handling exception conditions and creating unit tests for your code. There are also several recipes on the processes of debugging and optimization. Chapter 20, Packaging and Distributing Software, mainly deals with Ruby's gem packaging system and the Ruby Forge server that hosts many gem files. Many recaps in other chapters require that you install a particular gem, so if you're not familiar with gems, we recommend you read Recipe 20.2 in particular. The chapter also shows you how to create and distribute gems for your own projects. Chapter 21, Automating Tasks with Rake, covers the most popular Ruby build tool. With Rake, you can script common tasks like running unit tests or packaging your code as a gem. Though it's usually used in Ruby projects, Rake is a general-purpose build language that you can use wherever you might use Make. We close the book with 4 chapters on miscellaneous topics. Chapter 22, Multitasking and Multithreading, shows how to use threads to do more than one thing at once, and how to use Unix subprocesses to run external commands. Chapter 23, User Interface, covers user interfaces, apart from the web interface, which was covered in Chapter 16. We discuss the command line interface, character-based GUIs with curses and highline, GUI toolkits for various platforms, and more obscure kinds of user interface, Recipe 23.11. Chapter 24, Extending Ruby with Other Languages, focuses on hooking up Ruby to other languages, either for performance or to get access to more libraries. Most of the chapter focuses on getting access to C libraries, but there is one recipe about JRuby, the Ruby implementation that runs on the Java virtual machine, Recipe 24.5. Chapter 25, System Administration, is full of self-contained programs for doing administrative tasks, usually using techniques from other chapters. The recipes have a heavy focus on Unix administration, but there are some resources for Windows users, including Recipe 25.2, and some cross-platform scripts. How the code listings work. Learning from a cookbook means performing the recipes. Some of our recipes define big chunks of Ruby code that you can simply plop into your program and use without really understanding them. Recipe 21.8 is a good example. But most of the recipes demonstrate techniques, and the best way to learn a technique is to practice it. We wrote the recipes, and their code listings, with this in mind. Most of our listings act like unit tests for the concepts described in the recipe. They poke at objects and show you the results. Now, a Ruby installation comes with an interactive interpreter called IRB. Within an IRB session, you can type in lines of Ruby code and see the output immediately. You don't have to create a Ruby program file and run it through the interpreter. Most of our recipes are presented in a form that you can type or copy/paste directly into an IRB session. To study a recipe in depth, we recommend that you start an IRB session and run through the code listings as you read it. You'll have a deeper understanding of the concept if you do it yourself than if you just read about it. Once you're done, you can experiment further with the objects you defined while running the code listings. Sometimes we want to draw your attention to the expected result of a Ruby expression. We do this with a Ruby comment containing an ASCII arrow that points to the expected value of the expression. This is the same arrow IRB uses to tell you the value of every expression you type. We also use textual comments to explain some pieces of code. Here's a fragment of Ruby code that we've formatted with comments as we would in a recipe. 1 plus 2 hashtag equals 3 hashtag on a long line, the expected value goes on a new line. Math.sqrt, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10. Hashtag equals 7.41619848709566. To display the expected output of a Ruby expression, we use a comment that has no ASCII arrow, and that always goes on a new line. Puts this string is self-referential. Hashtag this string is self-referential. If you type these two snippets of code into IRB, ignoring the comments, you can check back against the text and verify that you got the same results we did. $IRB, main 001:01 plus 2 equals 3 IRB, main 002:0 math.sqrt, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10. Equals 7.41619848709566. 1. When a program's behavior depends on the current time, the random number generator, or the presence of certain files on disk, you might not get the exact same results we did, but they should be similar. IRB, main 003:0 puts this string is self-referential. This string is self-referential. Equals nil. If you're reading this book in electronic form, you can copy and paste the code fragments into IRB. The Ruby interpreter will ignore the comments, but you can use them to make sure your answers match ours, without having to look back at the text. But you should know that typing in the code yourself, at least the first time, is better for comprehension. $IRB, main 001:01 plus 2 hashtag equals 3 IRB, main 002:0 IRB, main 003:0 asterisk hashtag on a long line, the expected value goes on a new line. IRB, main 004:0 asterisk math.sqrt, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10. Equals 7.41619848709566. IRB, main 005:0 hashtag equals 7.41619848709566. IRB, main 006:0 asterisk IRB, main 007:0 asterisk puts this string is self-referential. This string is self-referential. Equals nil. IRB, main 008:0 hashtag this string is self-referential. We don't cut corners. Most of our recipes demonstrate a complete IRB session from start to finish, and they include any imports or initialization necessary to illustrate the point we're trying to make. If you run the code exactly as it is in the recipe, you should get the same results we did. 1. This fits in with our philosophy that code samples should be unit tests for the underlying concepts. In fact, we tested our code samples like unit tests, with a Ruby script that parses recipe texts and runs the code listings. The IRB session technique doesn't always work. Rails recipes have to run within Rails. Curses recipes take over the screen and don't play well with IRB. So sometimes we show you standalone files. We present them in the following format. #/usr/bin/rubyw #sample_ruby_file.rb, a sample file 1 plus 2 math.sqrt, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 plus 9 plus 10. Puts this string is self-referential. Whenever possible, we'll also show what you'll get when you run this program. For example, we might show a screenshot of a GUI program, or a record of the program's output when run from the Unix command line. $Ruby sample_ruby_file.rb. The string is self-referential. Note that the output of sample_ruby_file.rb looks different from the same code entered into IRB. Here, there's no trace of the addition and the square root operations, because they produce no output. Installing the software Ruby comes pre-installed on Mac OS X and most Linux installations. Windows doesn't come with Ruby, but it's easy to get it with the one-click installer. If you're on a Unix/Linux system,